Hello again. So today's lesson, we're going to look at how to deal with the counterclaim. So let's take a look at this, and then I'm going to show you an example based on one of the models that I used earlier as a model. So the counterclaim is an alternative position or an objection to your position. So it's called the counterclaim or the counterargument. And in the book, They Say, I Say, they call it planting a naysayer. So, and that is in one of the chapters, chapter 6, that you read. So I'm going to take some of the templates they offer you in that book. And if you haven't read that, or if you read it a while ago and you want to revisit it, I think you'll find it very helpful. So you want to address counterclaims in a fair, impartial way. And the reason you want to do that is because it will establish your credibility. And if you remember back when we were doing the rhetorical analysis, that ethos is very important in terms of, winning an argument. So you want to establish yourself as a credible source in a well-informed person, and really the most direct way to do that is to know what objections others will have. So when you can, you want to accept or accommodate counterclaims, and I'll show you what that looks like on the next slide. And then ideally, those counterclaims that are, maybe the big counterclaims, you want to be able to refute them or challenge them with reasonable and reliable evidence. So in an ideal situation, you have established your argument with, 2, 3, 4, 5 really strong body paragraphs. And then as you get toward the end of your argument, you're going to say, well, you know what? I do know that some people feel this way. However, and then you're going to back your point up with additional research that will challenge those notions. And again, like when you can do that, that's when it's like the punch. So here's some templates, and I took these right out of They Say, I Say. So for general, a general way, if you know, basically the view that people who are sort of going against your position will say, you can address it by saying, some readers may challenge my view by insisting that blah, blah, blah. Or something along these lines. Of course, many will probably disagree on the grounds that, like, these two fit with some of the big issues and topics out there that have been around for a while that, you have a different view of, but you want to address. So this one, actually these next three, I used some of the topics that you're drafting currently, so you can hear what it would sound like, because it looks like they're short right here and they're not necessarily as short. So although not all environmental scientists think alike, some will probably dispute my claim that changes in transportation options in the city of Hartford will reduce carbon emissions enough to justify initial investments. You would go from there to talk about exactly what those initial investments look like, sound like, add up to, and then you would continue by driving home the point, perhaps, that while those initial investments might be high, the benefit to better health and reduced environmental impact is certainly worth investing in. You almost make it like, oh my gosh, how could they possibly think this? This one, proponents of limiting abortion rights are right to argue that young women under 16 years old may not fully understand the risks associated with medical procedures. However, they exaggerate when they claim that abortion procedures pose high risks leading to infertility. So, this is a very controversial, touchy subject, but several students are writing about some aspect of abortion rights. So I did include that. And proponents of, pro-life, you could also call them that, pro-life proponents. You want to acknowledge that it's a difficult issue if your issue is very sensitive. And that, again, establishes your credibility, because some of these issues they go to people's moral code, and you don't want to dismiss someone's moral code immediately, especially if those are the people you're trying to convince. Okay, so I had to change my screen so you could see this bottom one. On the one hand, I agree with the Republican leadership that believe in decentralized government. On the other hand, I still insist, in a national crisis, the president has to take responsibility for developing timely and equitable solutions. So this, on the one hand, I agree with, that's an accommodation. So you're saying, okay, I will acknowledge and agree with this part. But this other part, the more relevant, important part, I insist on my point of view. All right, so I'm going to show you this example. And this, again, is the paper that, I'll go back to the beginning just for a second, that was dealing with news, redefining what's fit to print. And this person's thesis, the shift from print to online news provides unprecedented opportunities for readers to become more engaged with the news, to hold journalists accountable, and to participate as producers, not simply as consumers. So just to reiterate, I'm going to scroll down so that you can see how this writer addresses the counterclaim. Oh, I went right by it. Okay. So you can see in the annotations, opposing views are presented fairly, and Jacob counters opposing arguments. So he starts his topic sentence here. Not everyone embraces the spread of unregulated news reporting online. Critics point out that citizen journalists are not necessarily trained to be fair or ethical, for example, nor are they subject to editorial oversight. Acknowledging that citizen reporting is more immediate and experimental, critics also question its accuracy and accountability. He gives a quote. And then he gives another source in his book, Losing the News, Media Specialist, blah, blah, blah. And then he goes back to even a supporter like Gilmore. And if you remember in an earlier lesson, this was a source he used, or like in the first paragraph, is willing to agree that citizen journalists are non-experts, but he argues that they are using technology to make a profound contribution and a real difference. So if you really take a look at this, and I would invite you to pause and do that, you can see places where he is, this writer is doing a few different types of acknowledgments, even acknowledging that citizen reporting is more immediate and experimental. He's really framing the opposing views in a way that's fair. These are justifiable concerns, and it makes him sound like a really well-informed writer in this case. And then, the end of the paragraph, he does get back to his point by using an expert to say they're using technology to make a profound contribution and a real difference. And then he goes on to say, citizen reporting made a difference in the wake of Hurricane Katrina in 2005. Armed with cell phones and laptops, regular citizens relayed critical news updates in a rapidly developing crisis, often before traditional journalists were even on the scene. In 2006, the enormous contributions of citizen journalists were recognized when the New Orleans Times-Picayune received the Pulitzer Prize in public service for its online coverage, largely citizen-generated, of Hurricane Katrina. In recognizing the paper's meritorious public service, the The Pulitzer Prize Board credited the newspaper's blog for heroic, multifaceted coverage of the storm and its aftermath. So he's using really specific evidence to counter this idea that citizen journalism, we'll say, is, not credible. And to add this idea that the Pulitzer Prize Board awarded this particular situation and recognized the value really does counter his, critics in a very effective way. Writing for the Online Journalism Review, Mark Glasser emphasizes the role that blog updates played in saving storm victims' lives. Further, he calls the Times picking its partnership with Citizen Journalists a watershed for online journalism. So again, this writer does an outstanding job of framing the criticism and the counterclaims, and then really coming back with a very strong, vivid example to say, ha, I'll show you, and he does a really good job. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to continue talking about conclusions in another lesson coming up soon.